I recently graduated from a CDL school and decided to pursue a job related to my field after applying to every job that involved driving larger vehicles that I could find. An hour after submitting my applications, I received a reply for a bus driver position at Frederickson High School. The message read, "Hello, George. We have reviewed your application and have decided that you would be perfect for our position. Your first day will start tomorrow. Your bus's number is 458, and it is located at a bus yard on 207 Riverside Street. You can arrive at the bus yard at any time, but please ensure you arrive at the school before 4 a.m., as this is when the students are dismissed. Once the students enter the bus, you can deliver them to their 5 stops on Old Military Road. Sincerely, Ernest Frederickson, Principal of Frederickson High School." I was a bit confused about why there was no interview, but I decided to take the job anyway, not wanting to look a gift horse in the mouth. I also thought it was strange that the school hours were during the night, but I assumed the school operated 24 hours a day, dividing students and teachers into 4 groups for each shift to follow social distancing guidelines or for efficiency in general. At around 3:15 a.m., I got into my rusty 1974 Ford F-250 and drove to the address listed in the message. It wasn't far away, about a 15-minute drive. When I arrived at a vehicle gate next to a guard shack, the bus yard consisted of a flat slab of dirt with several buses parked in the back, and a large space in the front to allow for maneuvering the buses into the spots surrounding the yard. There was a fence with the aforementioned gate and shack, replacing part of the fence. The guard in the shack was startled by my arrival and opened the window slightly. "Who are you?" he asked. "Hello," I replied. "I'm George Redwood. I'm here for bus 458. Are you okay?" He picked up a piece of paper, looked at it briefly, and then passed me a key, which I presumed was for my bus. "Okay, sir, here's your key. Find your bus and replace its parking spot with your truck. Then you can go." The gate opened, and I did as he had asked. I drove my truck through the gate and got out to find my bus. I then drove my bus to the front of the yard and parked it in a corner. I walked back to my truck and parked it at my bus's original spot before going back to my bus and driving it back to the gate. My bus was one of those buses with the flat front, the engine in the back, and the driver in front of the front wheels. I'm not sure what the official name for this design is, but I noticed that the bus I was given had many dents and scratches, mostly on the front bumper. I didn't think much of it, and started my shift anyway. I arrived at the school at 3:47 a.m. and noticed that there was only one bus for the school, mine. The school was very small, so it made sense why there was only one bus. While I waited for the students to be dismissed, I found a list of rules along with a map in a gap between the steering wheel and the windshield. Rules for Frederickson High School busing. Do not use any electronic devices for navigation. They will try to deceive you. We printed out a map for you to follow. The bus stops where you can drop kids off are labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These stops resemble a bench with 3 walls and a roof, with the opening at the front. The bus stop number will be on both sides of all 3 walls. If you stop at a bus stop that is not one of these, leave the stop immediately and continue your journey. Try not to look at anything nearby that could be a fake stop, except for checking the wall to ensure it's valid. The road is old, windy, and unmaintained. If the road suddenly changes to a straight, newly paved road, and the scenery starts repeating, immediately slam on the brakes and turn around before it's too late. Once the road starts curving again and no straight parts are visible, you can turn around and continue your journey. If turning around is not possible, shift the bus into reverse and drive until you find a place to turn around or the road returns to normal. If the road reaches a dead end, turn around or reverse until the end of the road is no longer visible, similar to Rule 3. If the road merges with another road, remember which side you came from. This will be important if you have to turn around. Do not drive on the road you did not come from. If any other vehicles appear on the road, disable them by any means possible. Don't worry about minor damage to the bus. You can easily bash through any cars or light trucks, but be careful around larger vehicles that could put up a fight. Do not drop off any students if your bus is being pursued by any vehicles or you recently disabled one and it crashed near a bus stop. If your bus gets stuck for any reason, alert the students and do not let anyone in. There is a handgun in the glove compartment near the steering wheel. Use it to defend the bus if they attempt to get in. Wait in the bus until dawn, and then contact us to get you out of there. No pay will be deducted if this happens. If you hear a church bell, avoid going toward the source. If it's behind you, you're fine. If it's on your side or in front of you, turn around and get as far away as possible until the ringing stops. Once you can no longer hear the bell, you can continue your journey. This usually doesn't last long. If you see a creature on your right running parallel to your bus, do not under any circumstances open any doors or windows. While it will always run at the speed of your bus, you can confuse it by constantly accelerating and decelerating. Doing this may allow you to get into a position where you can run it over. This is the only known way to stop it. If the engine stops for no apparent reason, immediately start it up again. If that doesn't work, do not look at what is behind the bus. If that doesn't work, refer to Rule 7 for everyone's safety. If you see a human on the road, run it over. Even if it resembles a loved one, it is not human. If you fail to run it over, skip any remaining stops and return to the bus yard as quickly as possible. Do not under any circumstances open any doors or windows. If you have to turn around for any reason, do so as quickly as possible, even though you likely want to see it again. It is still following you. Once you arrive at the bus yard, alert the guard. I don't know what to do. If you see a mansion in the distance, turn off all lights and accelerate. None of our students live there, and its position on the road changes often, sometimes not appearing at all. The owners are deaf, but they can still see part of the road directly in front of the mansion. The area in front of the mansion is straight, and you can turn your lights back on once you're surrounded by forest again, so you'll be fine. The mansion is at least twice as tall as the forest and emits light from the rooms. If you pay attention, you can spot it from far enough away to turn off your high beams and headlights before they notice the light. If you see a ridiculously bright light behind you, they've seen you. If this happens, put on the modified sunglasses in the glove compartment and get out of there as quickly as possible. The students are prepared with similar sunglasses to prevent being blinded by this light, so don't worry about them. If you are forced to turn around for any reason, do so as quickly as possible. Do not drop any students off when the owners are chasing you, and return to the bus yard if necessary. Once the light disappears and you've lost them, you can continue your journey. The true end of this road merges with a larger road at a three-way stop, and if any students are still on the bus once you've passed all 5 stops, go back to the front of the road and try again. Keep doing this until all students have reached their stops or until you get too tired to continue. I was very confused about what to think of this. Sure, it sounds impossible, but as a long-time lurker of this subreddit, I know that I should take these rules seriously. Nevertheless, I continued waiting for the students to be dismissed and came up with a plan. I decided I would follow the rules unless they could potentially harm someone. If the rules were vague, like the one about vehicle ramming, I would evaluate the situation carefully. If I could prove a rule to be true without breaking any of them, I would assume that they were all real, and I would follow them all. At 4 a.m., the students exited the school. I counted on my bus, estimating that 20 students entered, about 80% of its capacity under these social distancing guidelines. Despite the situation, most of the students were very calm, as if they had been going to the school for so long that this didn't scare them anymore. Once all the students had entered the bus, I closed the door and got on the road. The road was a 2-lane, winding path through a forest. Although it was paved, it looked like it hadn't been maintained for decades, with potholes poorly patched with tar. The pothole fillings looked like chunks of the First World Lightning McQueen paved in cars. Roads like this are nothing unusual here in upstate New York. The first 10 minutes were uneventful, and I dropped off 3 students at stop 1 with no complications. That was until I heard a student scream, "They're here!" I looked to my left, and sure enough, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. Rule number 6. If any other vehicles appear on the road, disable them by any means possible. I accelerated the bus, but the pair of headlights accelerated faster and caught up to me in a matter of seconds. It started tailgating me, getting so close that the headlights were no longer visible from the rear window, but I still knew it was back there. "What is happening?" I yelled to the students, even though I knew exactly what was going on. I was still hoping that this was all a joke. Several students replied, but I couldn't decipher what any of them were saying. "Should I brake check the vehicle?" Every student replied, "Yes." So I did. I slammed on the brakes, causing my bus to come to a halt within seconds. I heard tires screeching coming from both vehicles, shortly followed by a loud crunch from the back of the bus. I then accelerated again, looking out the rear window to see the vehicle behind me had stopped chasing me. It must have broken something important under the hood, as we were going 60+ mph at the time of the collision. About a minute later, I arrived at stop 2. 2 students got up, a boy and a girl, so I assumed I was far enough away from the other vehicle to drop them off. I opened the doors, and they were about to step off until we noticed our mistake. That wasn't stop 2. It was stop C. Rule number 2, the bus stops that you can drop kids off at are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you stop at a bus stop that is not one of these, leave the stop immediately, and continue your journey. I immediately sped off, closing the doors while the bus was already moving. The 2 students were still at the front of the bus, grabbing the railing to avoid falling due to the dramatic acceleration. Not even a second after I closed the doors, I heard a demonic screeching from my right. "Driver, look!" one of the students yelled. She was pointing at the doors, revealing that something had managed to wedge a part of itself between the doors. I had to focus on the road, so I didn't have much time to look at it, but I was still able to catch a glimpse of whatever she was pointing at. It looked like an arm of a massive gingerbread man, except it reflected no light. I could hear whatever that arm was attached to being dragged across the asphalt, sounding like a mix of metal. I briefly opened the doors, causing the creature to lose its grip and fall to the ground. "What the heck was that?" I asked the students who were still on the staircase. "I don't know," replied the female student. "I have seen that thing a few times. The fake bus stop is fairly uncommon, but it usually happens at least once a month. The creatures usually don't get to the bus in time anyway." The male student returned to his seat. This event made me come up with a question for the female student. "Actually, how long have you been here?" "I've lived here since I was a baby," she replied. "Every house here has its own set of weird rules, but it's all my family could afford, so we've been living together ever since." "Oh, and what's your name?" I asked. "Angela." "Okay. Would you mind staying up here so we can?" "This is the police." "Stop your vehicle immediately," a masculine voice yelled through a megaphone. The voice sounded like a pathetic attempt to be human, like these sentences had been put through a text-to-speech software and blasted out of a megaphone. I was so into my conversation with Angela that I was completely oblivious to the police cruiser in the left lane. The other students were also distracted by us, so they were unable to warn me like they had done last time. I slowed down the bus, causing the cruiser to start passing me, intending to do a pit maneuver once it was in position. But what I saw in the cab will haunt me forever. The 2 creatures inside were vaguely humanoid enough for them to operate a motor vehicle designed for humans. They looked like the creature from Venom, but covered in bluish-black scales, as if they were reptiles. The one in the passenger seat turned its head 90 degrees to look at me without moving anything below its neck. Its eyes were thin, vertical lines stretching from the top of the mouth to the top of the forehead, like the eyes of the stick figures from the Henry Stickman collection, except they emitted a white light, much like the character Carol Bryan from Minecraft. The 2 of us stared at each other for what felt like forever. I was not concerned about the fact that I wasn't paying attention to the road. I somehow completely forgot I was driving a bus. I even forgot that I existed altogether. The entire concept of anything I was looking at vanished from my mind, as if I was in the latest stages of dementia. All I knew was the bright light emitting from the creature's eyes. After what seemed like an immeasurable amount of time, We broke eye contact with the cruiser and got stuck between a rock and a school bus. I immediately regained the concept of existence and realized what was going on. The bus had been going in a straight line, but the road wasn't straight, and the bus had been veering into the left lane this whole time, until the bus was pushing the cruiser against the cliff on the left. This caused the cruiser to come to a halt almost instantly. I immediately got back into my lane to avoid meeting a similar fate to the cruiser. Finally, Angela screamed inches from my face. She got down and cried on the floor while repeating the same sentence multiple times through sobs. "How long was I staring at that thing?" I asked her. She just cried harder. "Oh, okay," I said awkwardly. There's a tissue box between the dashboard and the windshield. You should probably take off your mask until you're done crying." I wanted to comfort her, but I had no idea what I was supposed to do in this situation, so I just let her cry on the floor while resting against my right leg. This usually works for me when I'm having a breakdown, but I have no idea how neurotypical brains work, or if Angela is neurotypical in the first place. Less than a minute after the crash, I arrived at stop number 3. 2 students got up to exit, so Angela got out of the way so they could get off at the stop and begin their trek down the ominous path beside it. As I left the stop, Angela answered my question from earlier. "You were looking at that thing for like 5 minutes," she said. "And you were so stiff that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't access the brakes. I could barely move the steering wheel. At least your foot wasn't on the gas." I laughed. "I just caught the accelerator. Which is stupider, calling liquid fuel gas, or calling the accelerator the gas? I guess we should pay attention to what's going on around us so something doesn't sneak up on us like last time," she said. "A good idea. Well, I'm going back to my seat so I don't get heated through the windshield. But if you need any help or have any more questions for me, just call me, and I'll come right back up here." I desperately tried to start the engine, but it was no use. The bus was still gliding down the road due to inertia, but I could barely move the steering wheel as the power steering was disabled when the engine turned off. The road was still relatively straight enough for me to stay on the road with my very limited steering. However, if I encountered a curve, I would have to stop the bus and execute Rule 7. The rules implied something was behind the bus, and I managed to turn off the engine. That is when I noticed a pair of headlights that suddenly appeared behind me. The unseen vehicle went into the left lane and accelerated until it was beside me. It was the cruiser from earlier. Those creatures had turned off their lights and followed my taillights to navigate the road. I immediately stopped looking at it to avoid being hypnotized again. After holding down the starter for about 10 seconds, the engine finally came back to life. I floored it. The cruiser noticed this and accelerated. Now that I had my power steering back, I blindly swerved into the left lane while I stared directly ahead. I heard a loud crunch from my left. I looked into my left mirror and saw that the cruiser was no longer following me. The entire chassis was bent, and the corner of my bus had collided with the back right door. The creatures attempted to hypnotize me through the mirror, but they were too far away at this point to affect me. Seconds after the crash, I saw stop 4 on the right but skipped it because the cruiser was way too close to it. The hill was still on the left, but the area on the right was flat enough to fit a few houses. These houses were fairly large, probably about 2,500 square feet on the top 2 floors, with an unknown amount of space underground if they had basements. I remembered that stops 1 and 3 didn't have any houses visible from the bus stop, so this was the first time I got to see the houses as I passed them. I decided to ask a few questions to the residents. "Can someone who lives at stop 4 come up here for a moment? I have questions about the houses," I said. A boy from the seat behind me came up. "How much does it actually cost to live here?" I began, but before I could say anything else, I saw an old man with a cane slowly cross the road. Rule 11: if you see a human on the road, run it over, even if it resembles a loved one. It is not a human. I already had enough faith in the rules at this point to know that it was not a human, but the screeching it made when I ran it over further reinforced it. After a short pause, the boy answered my question. $50 a month for me, at least. And yes, we have rules just as weird and terrifying as the ones in here. Oh wow, it's not as much of a bargain as it sounds. Anyone who lives here is either extremely poor or is oblivious to what they are getting themselves into. Most of the cost is paid with the mental and sometimes physical trauma that comes with living here. Yeah, I've heard the stories about places like this, the boy continued. And definitely not worth it. I doubt you could report any of this to the police or any other authority. My family actually did have to call 911 once. We told the operator that some dude with a gun was in our house, and nobody believed us. The officers that showed up had to force the creature that terrorizes the residents of Stop 4 to retreat back to the forest. Maybe we could tell you our story sometime. Yeah, maybe, I replied. I'm going back to my seat now. My name's Tommy, by the way. Nice meeting you. Nice meeting you, Tommy. I would like to hear your stories about your life here sometime. Tommy was about to return to his seat when he noticed something. Oh crap! He yelled. Rule 9! Rule 9. If you see a creature on your right running parallel to your bus, do not, under any circumstances, open any doors or windows. The creature will always run at the speed of your bus. You can confuse it by constantly accelerating and decelerating. Doing that may allow you to get into a position where you can run it over. This is the only known way to stop it. I looked to the right and saw it. Running beside the bus doors was a creature running on all fours. It was like a brute version of the creatures in the cruiser. Its arms and legs were nearly identical, and it was running like a horse. The bus was going 40 miles per hour at this point, a very appropriate speed for this road. I sped up, but so did it, and Tommy quickly ran back to his seat as the bus was starting to become unstable due to my excessive speed for the road. Now at over 80 miles per hour, the thing was still beside the door, and it had been since I first spotted it. I slowed down, but the creature didn't decelerate as quickly. Now, at 60 miles per hour, I ran the bus right at it and ran it over. Just before I could celebrate, I saw a pair of taillights. The taillights brightened as the vehicle slowed down. They saw me, and this wasn't anything small. It was a semi-truck. The truck slowed all the way down to 20 miles per hour, forcing me to do the same. I knew the driver was planning something, but I still had no idea what was going on. My questions were soon answered when a bright light was reflected off the left mirror, darting around the front of the bus looking for my eyes. But with the 40-foot trailer behind the truck, this made precision required for hypnosis incredibly difficult. The driver quickly realized this wasn't going to work, and he stopped. As I followed the truck, we brainstormed ideas on how to defeat the thing, even citing past experiences with large vehicles like this one. But to my right, above the forest, I saw something unnatural. It was the mansion. The mansion was at least 2 floors taller than the forest. It was also very large horizontally as well. I didn't know how to describe the building other than saying it reminded me of a woodland mansion from Minecraft due to the way it was surrounded by the forest and its dimensions. The mansion gave me an idea. Hey guys, are the mansion owners allied with the creature driving the truck? I don't think so, replied Angela. I really don't see them interacting. If they do, it's usually hostile, though they're not as aggressive as they are towards us. Oh good, you're going to make the mansion owners attack the truck, aren't you? I heard Tommy say. Exactly, I said. Well, just get as far away from the truck as you can so they don't see you too, replied Tommy. I'm all right. I turned off my lights once we were about 500 feet away from the mansion. The truck driver looked back at us through the mirror for a few seconds. The light illuminated the cab as if the driver was trying to say, I know you're still back there, you idiot. As we slowly approached the mansion, I let the bus slow down so I could gain some distance from the truck. I didn't touch the air brakes to avoid being heard by the truck driver. He may have known I was still behind him, but he didn't know how far away I was. I was about 200 feet away. The bus was down to 2 miles per hour. I pulled the parking brake, causing the bus to come to a halt silently. The truck was oblivious to what I was doing, and it was still going forward very slowly for some reason. It seemed that the driver was trying to stall me until reinforcements arrived. We all got our sunglasses to protect our eyes from what was about to happen, ready to put them on at any moment. The moment the truck's lights struck the road in front of the mansion, it happened. For a split second, I saw the light at full force. My vision was already being obstructed by spots, as if I had been staring at the sun for several minutes, and even with the sunglasses, it still bothered my eyes to look at it. The lights swarmed the truck like bees whose hive had been disturbed. While the owners were distracted, I put the bus into reverse and floored it. The sound of the engine got the attention of the truck driver, but he wasn't able to turn around or reverse very quickly due to the trailer. So, he ended up having to go forward to flee the owners. Now that the truck was gone, I went back into drive and continued down the road. However, not very quickly, so as not to catch up with the truck. I slowed down even more to get a better look at the now vacant building. The front of the mansion had wooden walls with a concrete base. There was a hole in the front with many equally sized rooms, each with one window across the walls. The room was illuminated by light bulbs on the chandelier. The rooms had a wide variety of contents. Some looked natural, some looked weird, and some were disturbing. One room looked like a kitchen, one like a bedroom, one was almost completely filled with a pile of wires, one was a prison cell, one had tens of black cats inside, and one had a floor covered in spikes with doll heads on them. How original. The room full of cats caused me to stop the bus. "Why is there a room full of cats?" I asked the students. "A room full of what?" they replied. "They have cats," Tommy said, who was sitting directly behind me. "I don't think we've ever gotten a good look at the mansion before. This is the first time someone managed to distract the owners," another student replied. I pulled the parking brake and got out of my seat. "I want to investigate the cat room," I told the students. "Go to the window, but don't enter the mansion, just don't." The same student from earlier replied and parked the bus right next to the window. Angela added, "Wait, hold on, what is your name?" I asked the anonymous student. "Oh, I'm Joseph." "All right, good to know." I then did what Joseph said. I positioned the bus so that the doors were right next to the window of the cat room. I got out and peered into the room. Cats everywhere, very malnourished, and the smell was rough. There was an island literally made of feces in the center, and it was definitely not okay. I grabbed a rock and smashed the window several times before the window split in half. I could have used a gun, but I didn't want to waste any bullets or attract any unwanted attention. Tommy, Angela, and 2 other students came out to help. Once the glass pane splintered, we continued hitting the concentrated spots until we had created a hole large enough for the cats to get through. As soon as we pointed this out to them, the cats rushed out to freedom. Whatever they were going to get themselves into in this forest was a better fate than whatever the owners were doing with them in there. The wire room was 1 room away from the cat room, with the prison cell in between the two. I walked over to investigate. "I could probably get a few $1,000 for all that copper here," I pointed out to the students. "Will we get any of it?" Tommy asked. "I'll give you each some for helping me retrieve it, but I'll take most of it as compensation for what I had to put up with today. $20 an hour isn't cutting it," I replied. I also had the rest of the students come out to help me with stealing the wire, promising a small portion of what I was going to get for them. I broke the window with the rock and made a small hole the size of a fist. "You know, it would be a lot easier if someone goes inside the mansion." "No," every student replied at once. "Okay, never mind then." We continued bashing in the window until the hole was big enough to climb through. We managed to load all the wires into the bus before the owners returned. Even if they did return before we were done, we had already set up a place to hide. The students then organized the wire once we were already on the road. As I was about to arrive at stop 5, I saw the owners returning from their mission. I quickly put on my sunglasses as I floored the bus and blindly drove through the light. However, the owners were not interested in me, and they continued their journey home. It seemed that the enemy attacked those who disturbed them, and somehow, driving by their mansion did that. They still had no idea that I had freed their cats and stolen their wire, and even when they find out, they will have no idea who did it. Now, I arrived at stop 5 a minute later and dismissed Joseph and 4 other students. This bus stop was similar to stop 4, with very similar houses as well. I still had 7 students on the bus as I skipped stops 2 and 4. I knew what I had to do. Rule 13. The true end of this road merges with a larger road at a 3-way stop. If any students are still on the bus once you have passed all 5 stops, go back to the front of the road and try again. Keep doing this until all students have reached their stops or if you get too tired to continue. Hey, you know you're going to have to drive down this road again, right? Tommy asked. Yeah, I know. Hey, at least this time you'll be more prepared, and you know that there's a fake bus stop between stops 1 and 2, and you know that the mansion is between stops 4 and 5. This doesn't refresh every time you go down the road, unlike the road with Rule 3 and the dead end. Alright, I'll go back and do another round. As I continued down the road, I found the semi-truck or what was left of it. I parked the bus next to the truck to get a better look at it. The truck seemed to have crashed straight into a tree instead of turning for the curve. The trailer's walls were partially melted, causing the roof to collapse onto the burning wooden crates inside. The body of the truck was completely destroyed, with only the chassis and engine blocks still being recognizable among the melting remains of the cab. I saw the charred skeleton of the driver. It's terrifying to think that could have been me, one student muttered. Tommy and I got out of the bus and walked to the side of the truck to further investigate what had happened here. Looking at the vague remains of the truck, I determined that the skeleton was in the bed at the back of the cab. I theorized that the owner's blinding light caused the driver to be unable to see the road and was therefore unaware of the curve. After the crash, the driver hid in the back of the truck in the fetal position as the owners brightened their lights to the point that the heat literally melted the steel body of the truck. This, combined with the fuel tanks that were set on fire, burned the driver to the point where he was not just a skeleton. Why are we looting this one too? Tommy asked. I don't think there's anything valuable that's still intact. I'm just investigating what happened here, I replied. Look, man, I'm just as horrified as you are. I've heard of disappearances relating to the mansion owners, but I've never seen what happens to them. The rules were just updated accordingly. Then we returned to the bus and continued down the road. I found the end of the road and made a left turn onto Route 3, intending to go back to the beginning of Old Military Road. Not long after I got on the road, I heard a student scream. What the? She was interrupted by her own choking. George, stop the bus now, Tommy instructed, as if I wasn't already doing that. I got out of my seat and looked back to see several students fighting a wire that was strangling one of the students. The wires had come to life and were crawling around like snakes. We evacuated the bus, and I locked the doors, hoping that they couldn't unlock them. Once we were outside, I freed the student from the wire that was choking her. I then inspected the wire and saw the copper bending and contorting on its own. The wires were fiddling around in the driver's seat, but they couldn't start the bus because I had the keys. Now what? A student asked. I could call 911, I replied. Man, what are you going to tell them? That we're being attacked by copper snakes? Tommy asked rhetorically. I paused for a moment before having an idea. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Ma'am, there are these snake things on my bus. I managed to drop them all inside, but I can't get rid of them. And what's your location? I'm on Route 3, near the spot where Old Military Road emerges under the highway. Okay, sir, we have sent animal control to deal with the situation. Can you stay on the line for me? Yeah, I can do that. I was interrupted by the engine roaring to life. How, sir? What is going on? The bus accelerated and drove into a guardrail on the side of the road at an angle. It was pushed back under the road by the guardrail. The bus continued accelerating as fast as it could while scraping against the guardrail to guide it down the highway. What? The snakes just hijacked the bus. Tommy spoke for me. The operator tried her best to stay professional, but she couldn't avoid letting out a chuckle about how ridiculous the situation was. Okay, we're going to deal with that as well. What direction is the bus going? It's going east, but it's scraping against the guardrail to guide it down the road. All right, sir, we have dispatched several units to close the road until the runaway vehicle has stopped. Do you need a ride? Yes, ma'am, but there are 8 of us. I am a school bus driver. That is fine. We can dispatch 3 units to take you to your destination. Oh, okay, thank you. You're welcome, sir. A few minutes later, 3 police cars arrived. I told the officers to take us back to the bus yard. As we drove down the highway, we found the bus. The wires had figured out how to use the steering wheel but still had no idea what they were doing. They were swerving all over the road, attempting to avoid scraping against the guardrail. I don't think they had any other perception of reality outside of touch. Multiple police cruisers, and even a SWAT truck, were chasing the bus at this point. It seemed that police from nearby towns were called in to help with this pursuit. Once we had passed the bus, the officer in the vehicle I was in interviewed me as we traveled to our destination. Sir, how did these snakes get into your bus? I was at a bus stop when they somehow snuck in and tried to choke out one of my students. We had to evacuate the bus so I could free the student from the snake that was strangling her. I partially lied. Why did you and your students evacuate the bus? Well, I didn't want to be attacked by the snakes while I fought the snake that was strangling one of my students. There were like 50 of them, so if I stayed in there, all of us probably would have been strangled to death. We arrived at the bus yard a few minutes later. I think the officers and I went to the guard. The officers then turned around and drove back to help pursue the bus. Hey guard, it's me again. The guard paused whatever he was doing on his phone and studied me for a moment. Oh, hey George. Oh, where's the bus? It was stolen by copper snakes. Yeah, of course, they did. These jobs are weird as heck. Wait, you too? Yeah, come in. I want to show you something. The guard unlocked the thick steel door and invited us in. The shack had a desk against the back wall, with an office chair facing the table and next to a window on the left. Above the desk was a wall of 6 monitors on the back wall, each displaying the input of a camera somewhere in the yard. The desk had a laptop on it in front of 2 of the monitors, though those monitors could only be seen if the laptop was closed. The shack was large enough for all of us to fit inside, though it was still a bit cramped. He picked up the paper I saw him look at when I first got here. Rules for Frederickson Bus Yard Guarding. Only the following people are permitted to enter the bus yard: Ernest Frederickson, Anna Evergreen, Harry Williams, George Redwood. If someone arrives that identifies as someone on this list, hold them at gunpoint until they leave, or you must shoot them to defend yourself. If a bus or other vehicle in the yard starts its engine for no reason, close the metal shades on the window and wait until it turns off. It may attempt to accelerate, but all buses and vehicles should be in park, so this won't work. Do not, under any circumstances, make your presence known until the engine stops. If one of the monitors starts showing static, smash it with a crowbar that we provided for you if possible. If you are currently experiencing Rule 2 at the same time, unplug the power strip all the monitors are powered by and get as far away from the monitor as you can without exiting the shack. Keep track of which monitor was showing static earlier, such as putting a sticky note on it. Once Rule 2 ends, smash the monitor before turning the rest of them back on. At any time, a man may show up thinking your shack is a snack bar. Give him something to eat, or you will be the snack. If you cannot give him a snack, call us and continue hiding until we have dealt with the situation. If the sun turns red, do not look at the sky for a prolonged period of time. You won't die, but the red sun will literally destroy your retinas if you look at it for more than a few seconds. The same may happen if you look at the sky, though it will take a little longer. Both of these are safe to look at through a camera, and pictures taken of the sky or sun cannot harm you, but they can damage the camera, similar to how they can damage your eyes. Do not sleep on the job. Just don't. If you get too tired to continue your shift, alert us, and we'll send someone to take your shift. Only leave once your replacement has arrived. Do not trust your peripheral vision if this happens. If you see a shadow figure roaming the nearby area, pretend that it doesn't exist. Do not let it know that it has physically entered our world. Around 3 a.m., your mother may show up and ask you about your job. She'll look like she does in the present, but if she is dead, she will look like she did shortly before her death. If you're adopted, your biological mother will show up and act like she knows you. If this happens, pretend you don't know her and tell her to get out. After I read it, the students took turns reading the rules for themselves. As we were doing this, my bus showed up. It took a while to get it here as it kept hitting those things along the way, and the bus was still being chased by several police cruisers and the SWAT truck. We got out of the shack and watched as the wires completely ignored the nearby curve and drove into a tree. They then turned the steering wheel as far right as it could go before reversing into the same tree again. The bus accelerated forward, swerving all over the place as it drove across the road and right through the fence, only stopping when it struck one of the buses. The wires paused for a moment before continuing their reckless journey. However, the hood was still open from when the engine was disabled by the creatures from Old Military Road, so one of the officers pulled out a shotgun and shot the engine repeatedly. This was the most American thing I had ever seen. This actually worked as one of the bullets sliced the serpentine belt, causing the bus to lose several important functions. The wires reversed back onto the road in a straight line as they no longer had powered steering. They continued driving, but it couldn't do much due to the lack of powered steering. The engine eventually overheated and stopped right before it struck that same tree again, this time causing it to fall over and collapse onto the roof of the bus. As the wires were trying to figure out what was going on, the officers investigated the bus. The guard, the students, and I got closer now that the bus could no longer run us over. The officer that had interviewed me earlier saw us approach the bus. "You call these things snakes?" he asked me rhetorically. "If I told you my bus was stolen by giant copper worms, you wouldn't have believed me," I replied. "Yeah, good point. So now what?" "I don't know, they seem stuck in there, so we might just leave them in there and tell the buyers." The officer was about to reply when the officer's radio received a message. "Philip, an armored truck got on the road and is going westbound towards your location." "Sarah, weren't you blocking one of the entrances to the road?" "Yeah, but the vehicle drove over my car and got on the road. It's that big. I think it's one of those marauders from that Top Gear episode." The rest of the officers were now gathered around Philip to hear what Sarah was saying. "I wasn't in the car, though. I was telling the driver why the road was closed when he drove over my car right after I told him why." "All right, copy that." Philip ended the call. "Yeah, you know what she said? Use your vehicles and the bus to form a barricade. This won't stop the truck, but it'll delay us long enough to open fire on it." The truck eventually showed up, and it was indeed a black marauder. The marauder was being chased by even more police cars. A police helicopter was hovering far above us now. The car barricade would stand no chance against the marauder. The truck stopped and came to a halt a few yards from the barricade, not because the barricade would stop it, but because the driver found what he was looking for, the bus. It was clear that the driver was looking for the wires, implied by how swiftly he got on the road after Sarah informed him why the road was closed. The officers took one look at the vehicle and knew they were screwed. The helicopter descended and hovered next to the marauder, but it got shot at by a man in the passenger seat. I noticed that it was actually a news helicopter, which explained why it did that. One of the officers called the dispatcher. "We're going to need backup. Send in the U.S. military. There's no way we can force the driver to get out." The driver got on the truck's intercom. "This is the Red Moth Auction Hall. One of our clients reported an item stolen. We are here to retrieve it." Another officer grabbed a megaphone from her car to join the amplified shouting match. "Sir, that does not justify running over an officer's vehicle and evading me." "Yes, it does. You wouldn't understand." While this was happening, a blue 2010 Ford pickup, along with a police cruiser escorting it, arrived at the bus yard from Riverside Street. The truck drove through the hole created by the bus and stopped beside us. The officer then, the police cruiser, went to join whatever was happening. At the intersection, an old man was inside the truck. Despite his age, he stepped out of the truck with ease. "First day, huh?" he asked me. The guard and I stared at him in confusion. The students stared at us, giving us a look that said, "Wait, you don't know this guy?" After an awkward moment of silence, the man identified himself. "No, I'm Ernest Fredrickson, the guy who hired you. Sorry about that. Not knowing who this guy was left me with a million questions." But before I could ask any of those questions, the driver of the Marauder opened his door to throw grenades at the officers. However, he made a fatal mistake. Either he didn't notice us standing 20 feet away or he didn't expect us to intervene. That is when I sprang into action. I grabbed the guard's hand, and we ran to the truck. Ernest pulled out his firearm and joined us. The driver noticed us and quickly threw the grenades he had already activated in advance, and then he tried to close the door. But before he was able to, I managed to get my left wrist stuck between the door and the wall of the truck, stopping the door from being closed. The driver attempted to repeatedly slam the door on my wrist, hoping that I would remove it because of the pain, but I didn't. While this was happening, the guard and Ernest opened fire at the driver. About half the bullets struck the door, but the other half managed to get into the cab, and most of those hit the driver. We ripped the door out of the dead man's grip, and I climbed into the truck to unbuckle the seatbelt so we could remove the body from the seat. But when I climbed under the seat, I found another man in the passenger seat, with the exact same attire as the driver. He appeared to be wearing a black version of what the U.S. Army wears. I noticed that he had a rifle, so I was forced to shoot him to avoid being shot myself. All of this happened in less than 10 seconds. The grenades the driver threw earlier landed behind the barricade and blew up, injuring several officers. Some of these surviving officers attended to the injured ones, while the rest came over to the Marauder to inspect it. The three of us returned to the yard where the kids were. Shortly after, the officers had entered the Marauder, and the back door was opened. 8 men rushed out of the truck. They all had the same attire as the 2 in the front, and 3 of them had briefcases for some reason. 5 officers chased them on foot. We all thought this was the end, as none of them had any weapons. Or at least we thought so. The one with the briefcases stopped for a moment and threw their briefcases at the officers. One of them had managed to strike an officer, knocking him to the ground. But the briefcases had another use besides being a projectile. As the officers passed them, they were detonated, causing a massive explosion. Chunks of the briefcase were flung outward, functioning as shrapnel. One of them hit Tommy, 2 hit the girl who had been strangled by the wire earlier, 1 hit Angela, and 2 more hit me and Ernest. Luckily, we all survived with minor injuries. When the smoke cleared, we saw the scene that lay before us. The Marauder had suffered very little damage, while the bus's body was heavily damaged but still intact, including the windows. The windshield was struck by 4 briefcase chunks, leaving spiderweb cracks where they collided. The bodies of the police cars were ripped apart from the force of the explosion, and the fuel tanks were spilling gasoline all over the road. Even the traffic lights at the intersection were bent. 7 ambulances arrived from Riverside Street, intending to treat the officers injured by the grenade explosion, but found far more than they had bargained for. In a dark twist of irony, this was still enough ambulances to transport these surviving officers to the hospital. Out of the 8 men in the back of the Marauder, 5 of them survived with minor injuries. The other 3 were dead or seriously injured. All 7 of the kids hid in the guard shack as the guard, Ernest, and I approached the group with our weapons drawn. As soon as they saw us, the healthy ones dropped their injured comrades and fled down Route 3 on foot in the same direction the Marauder came from. The 3 of us chased them, and managed to shoot all 5 of them. We walked back to the yard and saw a man talking with the paramedics. "What do you mean the snack bar is right there? What do you mean it's not open?" he said. "Crap," I muttered. He didn't know rule number 4. Rule 4, at any time, a man may show up thinking your shack is a snack bar. Give him something to eat, or you will be the snack. If you cannot give him a snack, call us and continue hiding until we have dealt with the situation. We continued approaching the ambulances but tried not to attract the man's attention. "Sir, we're paramedics. We do not have a snack bar." The man went from annoyed to angry. His voice became incredibly deep and demonic. "Give me a snack right now," he demanded. The paramedic stared at the man, very confused at what had just happened. The man's fingernails grew incredibly quickly, and they transformed into claws. In the process, he used his Wolverine-like hands to attack the man, peeling off a thick and large chunk of his forearm. The paramedic ran off and screamed in agony, literally being skinned alive. The man's fingernails broke off, and he returned to normal. "Thanks, have a nice day," he said, as if he had just bought this chunk of human flesh from a snack bar. He left in the direction he seemed to have come from. Several shadow figures appeared near him and wandered aimlessly. Rule 7. If you see a shadow figure roaming the nearby area, pretend that it doesn't exist. Do not let it know that it has physically entered our world. I walked up to the paramedics to inform them of Rule 7. Luckily, they complied, as they all witnessed what happened when you break Rule 4. The paramedics continued loading the injured officers into the ambulances, with the one that was skinned alive joining them when a heavy-duty tow truck, going way too fast for Riverside Street, bashed through two of the ambulances that were in its way. The truck made a sharp right turn into the left lane of Route 3, almost flipping over in the process. This truck was definitely able to tow the bus, and that's exactly what they did. The truck reversed to the bus, and two men got out, almost identical to the 10 in the Marauder, and quickly hooked up the bus to the tow cable. The men got back into the truck and sped off in the direction the truck was facing. This all happened within 15 seconds. The paramedics were about to leave, but the men in the tow truck didn't have time to attack them. Both of the ambulances that were damaged were still drivable. One of the paramedics was injured by the truck's crash after being run over by his own ambulance, and had to be transported to the hospital by his coworkers. He is expected to make a full recovery. Out of these 17 officers that were at this war zone, only 7 survived. All 5 of the officers that were pursuing the men were blown to bits due to being so close to the explosion. The 3 officers who were inside the Marauder at the time of the explosion survived with virtually no injuries. The 7 officers who were injured by the grenades were treated. 4 were declared dead at the scene, 2 died on the way to the hospital, and only 1 survived. She is severely injured but is expected to make a full recovery. Out of the 4 officers attending to the injured, 1 died at the scene, 1 was critically injured, and the other 2 survived with minor injuries as they were behind the bus at the time. The one that was critically injured is also expected to make a full recovery. I don't know where the other 6 officers were at the time of the explosion, but they all died at the scene. When interviewed, I told them what happened and explained that I said snakes, because they wouldn't believe me if I told them the truth. The only difference is that I said a pile of copper wires was near a bus stop, and they invaded the bus. The students all told the same lie. Ernest, the guard, and the surviving officers backed my story, saying that there were wires in the bus. None of us were charged with anything, and the 3 of us who raided the Marauder were praised for our bravery. All 10 of the men died at the scene. Their bodies couldn't be identified. The Marauder was impounded by the police. Ned's license plate revealed that the vehicle was registered under the name Alfred Cornell, with the address being somewhere in Maine. When the police went to that location, they found an empty lot in a semi-remote location with nothing on it, other than a brick wall that was 20 feet long, 8 feet tall, and 1 foot wide. The tow truck and my bus were never seen again, at least for now. Ernest tried to track down the bus, but its tracker was disabled somehow. The news station that tried to film the massacre was ordered by the federal government to delete the limited footage they had captured and to never speak of this until further notice. The rest of us that witnessed the event were essentially given non-disclosure agreements by the government. The family members of the dead officers were given large settlements. These surviving officers had their medical bills paid for, and they were given a smaller settlement for their troubles. The 7 students who didn't make it to their stop were taken care of by Ernest, his wife, and his 3 middle-aged children until they could be returned home. Ernest told me that I wasn't actually being paid $20 an hour. The ad was only listed that way to not attract unwanted attention. I was actually being paid $200 an hour, and he gave me a $1,000 bonus for my troubles today. The guard's wage was also multiplied by 10, and he also got a $1,000 bonus. I told Ernest what actually happened, and we now have a 14th rule for the bus drivers. Rule 14. Do not steal from the mansion owners, because they will find you and they will do whatever it takes to get their stuff back.